If you grew up anywhere in the online age, you've probably heard rumors at some point about something called a snuff film. If you're unfamiliar, the story goes like this. Somewhere in the world, there are people who film themselves committing murder. They then make copies of the recording and sell those copies to other people who like to watch that kind of thing. That's a snuff film, a film that makes money by showing a life being snuffed out. Of course, we've known for a long time that some people like to watch other people die. In centuries past, many countries had public executions, and oftentimes large crowds would show up to watch, dressed in their best outfits, especially if the condemned prisoner had done something extra nasty, or the death itself was expected to be spectacular in some way. In more recent decades, there's been a thriving trade, mostly underground, of footage of real-life murders, suicides, and other tragedies. Some people spend a lot of their free time watching ISIS beheading videos, or footage of people jumping from the World Trade Center on 9/11. The Faces of Death film series began in 1978 with footage of autopsies and police shootouts. And not only did the original film get 7 increasingly gory sequels, but a fictional reboot is currently being filmed as of this recording. But none of those things are real, actual snuff films. Plenty of people have died on film, and plenty more people have watched. But that's not what the urban legend is about. As far as anyone knows, no one has ever deliberately committed a murder and filmed it with the intention of selling that video later. At least, not until now. In February of 2025, a series of ads began appearing on the dark web. The promises made in these ads were disturbing, or tantalizing, if you're into that kind of thing. The post advertised packages of videos for sale on the messaging app Telegram. According to the anonymous poster, the videos depicted the killing, butchering, and eating of a human being. At first, it was easy to assume that the poster was lying. It was probably just old footage that had been recycled, or maybe something faked with special effects or AI. Snuff films, after all, are a great opportunity for a scam. If someone pays you for a video of a crime, and then you send them a video of a fake crime, what are they supposed to do? Go to the police and demand their money back? Sue you for a fake murder? But even then, there are always a few people willing to take a risk on a shady proposition. And the poster made a few sales. It cost only 98 yuan, or about $14 to enter the basic Telegram group, twice that to enter the premium group and get the goriest content. Some users paid up and got what they paid for. And then, word began to spread. This was not old footage. It wasn't AI. This was the real thing, and shockingly, it had been at least partially the victim's idea. A quick PSA here. This case is one of the most disturbing things that I've ever researched. For me, it goes up there immediately with Junko Furuta and the Dardenne family murders. I have seen a lot of horrific stuff doing this job, and this one was honestly my excuse to go back to therapy. If you are at all sensitive to any of the topics I listed at the beginning of this story, feel free to skip to the time code included on screen now, and save yourself the nightmare. For everyone else who's still here, don't say I didn't warn you. The first video in the package is 24 seconds long. It shows a naked young man lying face up on what looks like a bathroom floor, pleasuring himself. Behind him is another naked man, who looks older and is holding a knife. As the younger man screams that he is about to climax, the older man lifts up the knife and quickly slices downward, cutting off the younger man's head with 3 strokes from what looks like a cleaver. The body quickly lies motionless on the floor, and there is blood everywhere. The killer is breathing heavily, and there is a loud traffic noise from somewhere outside. The second video is 73 seconds long, and it shows the same sequence of events, but it's taken from a camera at floor level and starts much earlier. There's no sound in the second clip, but it looks like the victim and the killer are talking to each other before the killing takes place. The other videos are somehow even more disturbing. There's a long sequence showing the victim's body being processed, much like an animal carcass being butchered. The killer cuts up the victim's body parts, carefully separating organs and muscle tissue from bones and fat. Other images show parts of the body being cooked in what looks like a North Vietnamese stew with jujubes in it. Another quick side note, most of the source documents I used to write this story were originally written in Vietnamese and then machine translated to English. I've done my best to get the details right as much as I can, but every once in a while I ran into something that just seemed really odd to me, like the jujubes. As far as I can tell, jujubes or red dates aren't a very common ingredient in Vietnamese stews, but dried jujubes are used in traditional Chinese medicine, and at least one document referred to this stew as a medicine stew. So maybe there were jujubes in this one stew, or maybe the translation algorithm messed something up and put jujubes when the original document said carrots or something like that. Aside from the videos of the killing and cooking of the victim, there was one other collection of videos being offered for sale in these Telegram groups, that being the rehearsals. If you have heard of this case or seen someone else cover it, then the video on screen now is more than likely what you've seen. If you haven't, the videos show the victim alive, placing his own head on a chopping block and letting his future killer practice chopping off his head with a rubber knife. At the end of the rehearsal, the victim sits up and hugs the man who will one day end his life. There are 11 videos and 98 images in all. Everything is shot from multiple angles with tripods and high-quality cameras. Every step of this event was carefully planned and organized to produce the best possible product. The killer covers his face whenever he's on camera with either a blue surgical mask or a Guy Fawkes mask like the title character in V for Vendetta. The events are filmed in and around what looks like a vacant building, somewhere in an urban area with lots of cars going past on a nearby road. Based on the accents of the victim and killer and the ingredients in the food, it's likely that the killing took place somewhere in the northern part of Vietnam, but that doesn't narrow it down very much. Someone wanted people to see this man get beheaded, but not to know where it happened or who did it. But that someone severely underestimated the power of the internet. In July of 2025, a couple of the clips from the video package went viral in some of the other dark corners of the internet. As it turns out, even people who hang around these dark digital backrooms have lines that they won't cross, and these videos crossed several of them. A group of online sleuths banded together to find the killer and bring some kind of justice to this situation. And they quickly picked up a nickname: the Death Detectives. The obvious first step was identifying the victim. His face was uncovered in several parts of the video, and it wasn't difficult to match him to a man from a village in North Vietnam who was now living in Hanoi and selling seafood in a local market. His name was Nguyen Xuyen Dat. He'd been born on March 10th, 1989, and he had left quite the digital trail. Dot had left his home village sometime in 2020 or 2021, leaving behind his parents and at least one sister. He was considered a missing person, but nobody close to him seemed to have done anything about it. There are indications that his mother suffered from some kind of mental illness, which may have taken up a lot of his family's attention. Regardless, Dot was listed as receiving COVID relief funds at his family's home at the beginning of the pandemic, and then was working in the seafood market not long after. One thing is clear though, he was spending a lot of time online. Dodd was a big fan of a website called Watch People Die, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you were using the dark parts of the internet back in the early 2000s, think of it as just another version of Rotten.com. He hung around in forums dedicated to murder, cannibalism, BDSM, and gory media. He described himself as gay and interested in a master-slave relationship. He asked to have a popular Japanese gore manga translated into Vietnamese. In the manga, a woman has sex with at least 2 different men and each time cuts off her partner's heads right as they reach climax. In each case, the man's severed head lives on for several seconds afterwards and talks about the ecstasy that he's experiencing. Dot used the screen name Dat Beheaded or Dat Beheading on multiple sites. In the last couple of years before his death, he began actively searching for someone to take his life in the way that he fantasized about. He told other users that he was sick and that he wanted to die, and that he would have taken his life a long time ago if it weren't for his own religious beliefs. On January 25th, 2025, Dot made a cryptic Facebook post. 3 hours left until it's done. There was no evidence that he'd been seen alive after that date. On June 10th, 2025, after the death detectives found Dot's Facebook account and began poking around and commenting, the account posted that it was about to be permanently locked, which it was shortly after. The detectives concluded that Dot had probably died on January 25th, but that the killer had likely taken his phone and continued to use his social media accounts to maintain the illusion that he was still alive. Then, they turned their attention to the crime scene and the killer. The videos hadn't included anything so obvious as an address, but there were details that stood out to the death detectives. A bottle of water from a brand sold in Vietnam, a jug of Chinese detergent from a brand that was sold in both China and in the border regions of Vietnam. Even the tiles on the floor beneath Dot's body stood out. And then there was the killer himself. While his face wasn't visible, most of his body was. He had a receding hairline and a birthmark on his shoulder. He had a pattern of brown bumps that looked like moles or skin tags cascading over his right shoulder and down his arm. There was also a tattoo that clearly read, "That day, 9/13, all this being more than enough to start with. In July of 2025, Vice ran a story on what had become known as the Vietnamese butcher case. The story sparked a flood of interest online, but very little movement. And then, as the summer turned to fall, the detectives began to get lucky. In October, a YouTube channel began posting a series of videos with 3D recreations of the killing. Although most of these videos are now paywalled, they reignited interest in this crime, and people began seriously trying to identify the man in the mask. They were able to trace the clues in those videos to a collection of online accounts under a common name. However, I'm not going to be using that name, mostly because it looks like the prime suspect in this case was running those accounts under the name of his eldest son, who had nothing to do with this killing. But even then, after the careful planning and intentional vagueness, the killer would soon have a name. In November of 2025, the sleuths had their suspect, Duan Van Sang, a deputy captain in the Department of Domestic Market Management and Development. The department is in charge of monitoring markets and product quality in Vietnam. Sang was 57 years old and either semi or fully retired, but he still worked with the Council of Clans in his home province in some capacity. He also still had access to the former headquarters of his team, which they'd been slowly moving out since 2023. The details of the inside of the building, from the green paint on the door to the blue floral tiles and red baseboard, eerily matched the space in those videos. The killing happened 4 days before the Lunar New Year, during the Tet celebration in Vietnam. During this time, no one would have been in the mostly abandoned headquarters. For reference, it would have been like committing a murder in an abandoned government office building on the day after Christmas. Sang's hairline and eyes matched the killer in the videos, as did the scar in his left eyebrow. Both men had eczema on their right legs, and photos of Sang in a short-sleeved shirt showed brown lumps in the same place on his bicep as the killer showed in the videos. And while there were no straight-on images of Sang's tattoo on the public internet, the glimpses of it in public photos all matched the tattoo on the killer's right arm. Sang had been no stranger to talking to people online about his sexual desires. Hell, Sang had been posting about his sexual preferences online for over 20 years by that point. He described wanting to be a master in a master-slave relationship and having fantasies of torture and cannibalism. And by the time the death detectives identified Sang, the social media accounts for both Dot and Sang were both connected to the same phone, and only Sang was still posting from it. Duan Van Sang was arrested by Vietnamese police sometime around late November of 2025. They did search his home and the former headquarters, using suction tools to search the plumbing for possible traces of human remains. Neighbors interviewed by local media described a terrible smell and a lot of flies around the Tet holiday, as well as dogs coming home with strange bones in their mouth. On December 3rd, 2025, Colonel Vu Tan Tung led a press conference outlining the case and the evidence against Sang. At the time of writing, Sang hasn't yet gone to trial, but it does look like the Vietnamese government is taking an interest in the fact that an official in that government may have been responsible for all of this. Before ending this, I want to mention something to everyone watching. I know that there will be people who watch this and want to seek out that footage. And while, yeah, it can be found, I strongly encourage you to simply leave it alone. After viewing it myself, it is something that I know I am never going to unsee, and it really did mess with me for weeks after. So if you are really curious, it may be best to just stay that way. As for the victim in all of this, well, it looks like he may have genuinely wanted to die. But because there's no way to scrub all traces of those videos off the internet, what he's getting instead is the darkest possible way to live forever. Today's video is sponsored by Rocket Money. If there's one trap that we are all guilty of falling into, it's subscriptions. Nowadays, there is a subscription for literally everything, from the software that we use to work, the shows that we watch to relax, to the music that we listen to. And I, like many others, are sick of having our bank accounts slowly bleed out due to these one-time trials we meant to cancel be forgotten about. And then before you know it, it just becomes another faceless hand grabbing for your wallet. But all of that can finally be addressed through today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that allows you to manage subscriptions, lower bills, make a custom budget, and grow your savings all in one place. Legitimately, because of this sponsorship and using their service, Rocket Money showed me that I was paying for 4 separate subscriptions that I hadn't used in over a year. And they didn't stop there. They've helped me create a budget that eliminates any stresses I had over my spending habits, and has helped me budget both work and life expenses separately. Rocket Money can also help lower your bills by automatically scanning your bills to find savings. Apart from that, they can also negotiate on your behalf, meaning you no longer have to do the dreadful task of calling customer service. With achievements like saving members over $880 million in canceled subscriptions, Rocket Money is a no-brainer if you are ready to get serious about your financial health. Take control of your finances today. Scan the QR code or click the link below to get started for free. Thanks again to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. If you are like about half of my viewers, you probably learned about the 9/11 attacks in school. But if you're a millennial or older, you might remember them from personal experience. And if you're an American, you might remember something that was said an awful lot in the days and weeks after the World Trade Center fell. This is even worse than Oklahoma City.
There's the Alfred Murray Federal Building behind me, and you can see just how badly damaged it is. It's about half of the building that is literally hanging.
Can you tell me your name?
Is there someone there?
My daughter's right, and she's
As the chopper goes around the side of the federal building, look at that shot.
Holy
It is
cow.
absolutely incredible.
About a
The
third.
side of the federal building has been blown off. Jesse?
About a third of the building has been blown away.
In 2001, the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995 was only 6 years in the past, and it was everyone's go-to shorthand for what terrorism was and how it worked. Until 9/11, Oklahoma City was the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil, and it's still the deadliest domestic terrorist attack committed by an American against other Americans, which resulted in 168 people being killed that day. Even stranger is the fact that it might not have been 168. It might have been 169. We just can't be sure. The official Oklahoma City Memorial lists 168 dead, but if that's true, it might require one of the victims to have 3 legs. Let's go back a little. On April 19, 1995, at around 9 a.m., a man parked a Yellow Rider truck in the drop-off zone underneath the American Kids Daycare Center in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He walked briskly away from the truck, leaving it illegally parked, and at 9:02 a.m., the truck exploded. The truck was packed with more than 4,800 pounds or 2,200 kilograms of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, nitromethane, and diesel fuel. The blast was equivalent to 5,000 pounds of TNT, and it ripped a massive hole in the building. 2 seismometers, one of them being 25 miles away, recorded the explosion as a 3.0 on the Richter scale. Seconds later, the northern side of the building collapsed, leaving the rest of the structure looking like some kind of giant monster had taken a bite right out of the side of it. But this monster was no myth or urban legend. This was caused by a man named Timothy McVeigh, a Gulf War veteran and self-described white supremacist who had decided that the best way to settle his grievances with the federal government was to bomb a federal building. McVeigh later claimed that he was trying to avenge the deaths of American citizens killed by federal agents during the 1992 Ruby Ridge standoff in Idaho and the 1993 raid on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. McVeigh was pulled over and arrested by an Oklahoma State trooper within 90 minutes of the explosion, mostly because he was dumb enough to try to make his escape in a car without a license plate while carrying a concealed weapon. After the trooper had arrested him for that, he found a business card for a military surplus store in Wisconsin. On the back of that card was written, "TNT for $5 a stick. Need more." The rest of Timothy McVeigh's trial, conviction, and eventual execution isn't relevant to our story, at least not yet. So we're going to skip giving him the attention that he so desperately wanted and go back to the Murrah building. Because the bomb went off just after 9 in the morning, The building was already full of people getting on with their day. A meeting of the local water resource board had started at 9 o'clock, and the audio recording of that meeting caught the sound of the blast, followed by people screaming and someone ordering everyone out of the room. The building housed offices for 14 federal agencies, including the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which McVeigh blamed for the deaths at Waco, along with the Drug Enforcement Agency, which wasn't involved at Waco or Ruby Ridge, but which McVeigh hated anyway. The building also contained a Social Security Administration office and recruiting offices for the U.S. Army and Marine Corps. When you factor in everyone who would have worked in those offices, and everyone who could have been visiting the building to, say, get a Social Security card, that's a lot of human beings who suddenly found themselves sitting on top of an explosion and then inside a collapsing building. And that's before you remember the bomb was parked under a daycare. In total, the population of the Murrah building at the moment of the blast is estimated to be at 646 people. Of those people, 163 of them are known to have died in the blast. There were 5 documented deaths that came from outside of the building, including a nurse who was hit by falling rubble while trying to rescue survivors. 3 of these victims were pregnant women, and their fetuses are often included in the body count. There were also 19 children who died in the blast, 15 of whom were in the daycare center. 108 of the dead were federal employees, as McVeigh wanted, but most of them worked for the Social Security Administration or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, not the ATF like he was primarily after. And more than 680 people were injured, both inside and outside the building. Emergency services began receiving 911 calls about the bombing within a minute of the explosion. Every possible first responder rushed to the scene. Many police, firemen, and EMTs who heard the blast rushed toward the sound without waiting for orders. So did many nearby civilians. Before 9:30, a command center had been set up and professionals and volunteers were frantically digging through what was left of the building to rescue the living and recover the dead. Within the first hour, 50 people were pulled out alive, but many others weren't so fortunate. Some survivors were trapped so tightly that doctors had to amputate their limbs without anesthetic to free them from the rubble. Victims were sent to every hospital in the area, and the dead were sent to temporary morgues on site. There, they had to be identified through a combination of full-body x-rays, dental examinations, fingerprinting, blood test, and rudimentary DNA testing. Which brings us to the extra leg. The last living victim of the bombing to be found was a 15-year-old girl who was pulled from the rubble at the base of the building at around 7 p.m. on April 19th. After that, rescue workers found only dead bodies, or more accurately, body parts. Explosions aren't exactly kind to human tissue, and neither are collapsing office towers. So no one was surprised that many of the dead in Oklahoma City were found in pieces. That left investigators with a sort of morbid jigsaw puzzle. Which arm goes with which torso? Which head goes with which foot? Is this even all the same person? In 1995, DNA testing was still incredibly crude by modern standards, and it took weeks if not months to complete. So most of the matches were made with other techniques, like matching fingerprints to military records, or putting together fragments of clothing that seemed to line up. Something that isn't really an exact science. The mystery leg was found in the rubble on May 30th, 1995, more than a month after the bombing. It was tagged P-71, short for Human Remains Part 71. And at the beginning, there wasn't much to go on. The shaved leg was wearing a black military-style boot, size 7.5, and what looked like the remains of an olive drab pant leg. Depending on which account you read, the leg had plastic fragments either embedded in it or found very close by. At first, the leg was identified as belonging to a light-skinned, dark-haired male probably less than 30 years old. Shortly after this, though, the medical examiner's office changed the description. The leg now belonged to a light-skinned black woman. It was tentatively identified as belonging to Lakeisha Levy, a 21-year-old airman at the nearby Tinker Air Force Base who had business in the Murrah building that day. It was buried with the rest of her remains in a crypt in New Orleans in 1995. That was until investigators found Levy's actual leg, DNA and all. P-71 was removed from Levy's crypt in 1996, and all of Levy's remains that could be connected to her were finally buried in the same place. So the same question continued to remain. Where did P-71 come from? Whose leg was this? By the time the news of a mystery leg was reported, Timothy McVeigh was already on trial for the bombing, as was a man named Terry Nichols. Nichols had met McVeigh during their stint in the Army and had shared McVeigh's white supremacist views. Evidence shows that he worked with McVeigh to gather the explosives to make the bomb, drove with him to Oklahoma City 3 days before the blast to drop off the getaway car, and helped him assemble the bomb itself. However, Nichols was at home in Kansas with his wife and children on the day the bomb exploded in Oklahoma, and he claimed that he had backed out of the plan before April 19th. Even after the original mystery leg was connected to Levy in 1996, this still left P-71 unaccounted for. Lawyers for both McVeigh and Nichols noted that the barrels used to hold the fuel for the bomb had been made out of blue plastic, so those blue fragments connected to the leg suggested that whoever P-71 had been, they had been close to the barrels when they exploded. According to the lawyers, this meant that P-71 was all that was left of the real bomber, who had been incinerated in the blast, and that McVeigh and Nichols were innocent. Before I go on, I'm going to pause here to talk about the evidence against McVeigh and Nichols for a moment. The axle of the Ryder truck survived the explosion, and the VIN number on it was matched to a rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. The workers who rented that truck provided descriptions of a man who rented it under the alias Robert Kling, and the FBI produced this sketch based on those descriptions. The owner of a local motel identified the man in this sketch as Tim McVeigh. Now, police sketches obviously aren't perfect, and neither are eyewitness identifications. But once he was arrested, Tim McVeigh not only confessed to the bombing, but kept on confessing. He confessed to the FBI, he confessed to local reporters, he bragged to the New York Times, he even did an interview on 60 Minutes where he explained his motivations, and sickeningly seemed pretty proud of himself. Either Tim McVeigh committed this bombing, or he really wanted everyone to think that he did. Terry Nichols, meanwhile, is on record buying the fertilizer that was used in the bomb and renting the storage shed where it was kept. He turned himself into authorities and he admitted to helping build the bomb. A search of his home turned up blasting caps, detonating cords, ground ammonium nitrate, a fertilizer receipt with McVeigh's fingerprints on it, a phone card that McVeigh had used to shop for fertilizer, and a hand-drawn map of Oklahoma City. He also confessed extensively and repeatedly, and the only other co-conspirator that he identified was a man named Michael Fortier. Michael Fortier backed out of the plan even earlier than Nichols did. He testified against both men at their trials, went to prison, and is now in the witness protection program. There is a lot of evidence, a ridiculous amount, against the people who were actually convicted in the bombing. There is excellent evidence, including security video showing McVeigh driving the truck by himself and walking away by himself before the explosion. McVeigh himself even bragged to 60 Minutes about it, saying that he pulled off the bombing all alone. So if McVeigh bombed the Murrah building alone, what's the story behind P-71? The bomb fragments aren't necessarily proof that the owner of the leg was close to the bomb when it exploded. After all, collapsing buildings aren't great for preserving crime scenes, and lots of body parts landed close to things they hadn't been nearby when the bomb went off. P-71 could have picked up fragments of the barrels when it fell, or when debris landed on it, or when the building shifted during rescue efforts. And if the human being attached to P-71 wasn't next to the bomb when it went off, it's entirely possible that they were just another victim of Timothy McVeigh. So then why hasn't this human being been identified? In 2015, reporters at the Washington Times announced that a DNA profile had been developed for P-71. But if that profile exists, it's never been made public. Personally, I'm a little skeptical. The Washington Times is not the world's most reliable source, but even then, getting a usable DNA profile from a heavily contaminated body part that had been decomposing in the ruins of a collapsed building for a month before anyone got to it was pretty difficult to do in 1995. The Oklahoma State Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that a DNA profile exists, but there's no word on how complete or useful it is. In 2018, bombing survivor Jane Graham requested that the DNA profile be released to the public. Her request was denied because she couldn't prove that she was related to P-71 or involved in any legal action against P-71. Graham has said that she believes the leg belongs to someone who wasn't in the building during the bombing, because none of the survivors reported missing anyone who matched the description and hadn't already been identified. Whoever P-71 was, they didn't have any surviving co-workers, family members, friends, or anyone who would have noticed that they were gone and reported them missing. Unfortunately, that doesn't narrow things down very much. Because there were so many government offices in the Murrah building, there were plenty of random people from the public who might have had business there on April 19, 1995, but not any other day. For example, an 18-year-old walking into a recruitment office for the first time might not have left a paper trail yet, at least not one that would have survived the explosion. Moreover, it's generally agreed that there were a lot of homeless people in the area around the building at the time. It was a place where people could access government services after all, and the homeless population of any American city includes a number of veterans and other people who are eligible for government services. Maybe no one reported P-71 missing because they already were missing from the lives of their loved ones. It's a sad fact that many victims of large-scale crimes and other disasters often go unidentified. It's less common now in the age of forensic genealogy, but if there's no DNA to test or no capacity to test it, some victims go unidentified for years, for decades, or forever. Whoever P-71 was, they were a human being. They woke up that morning, got dressed, and pulled on their size 7.5 boots. And they never came home, wherever that might be. Maybe they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe their name is already on the list of the dead. Or maybe it's not. But ultimately, the question still remains: who was P-71?